or before see a big rise in job applications actually, and stats from there. So welcome back, Rob, Shahroo. We should see Livvy as well. I'm not sure if Livvy's going to be joining us, hopefully. Maybe she'll be in at some point for our panel session. So bringing everyone back, let's have a talk. Lots of different elements about behaviour change. So I'm going to go from the top. Oh, Livvy, you're there. Brilliant. Hi, Livvy. Welcome back. So I've got a question from Becky. I'll read it out and then we can kind of decide how we distribute it. So mode of travel seems fixed in people's core identities, i.e. cyclist or motorist, or I'm not the sort of person who catches the bus. So habits are entrenched. How do we come against this and encourage people to try other modes? So I feel like this is covered by a lot of you. And I'm going to say as well, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to try and keep this short and snappy. And this is the last session of the day as well. So really quick, sort of 15, 20-second answers. So yeah, who'd like to chime in on this one first?
I can have a word if you like.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
I think the two interventions that I talked about try to do this actually. So with the bus one, absolutely is entrenched. As I said, I think if you drive, you just think that the bus is inferior. That's just how it works. But what the interesting thing is, once you start to pick it apart, it's not always the worst option. And people will admit that when you kind of confront them with it. So actually, if you're stuck in traffic and the bus is flying past in the bus lane, then you'd much rather be in the bus because you're going to get where you're going quicker. So trying to think about that right place, right time thing, I think is really interesting when it comes to changing transport behaviour, because you're not going to wholesale change identities. But you can kind of get people at moments where they'll be more open to think differently.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Pete. And Shahroo, do you want to comment on that, because it's sort of entrenched behaviour seems to be one of your areas of expertise?
Yeah, and I think as an extension of what Pete said, I think it's about saying and not but. So I'm a bus person, and sometimes I this, and I think the more that we can normalise that, less sort of binary, but allow the person to retain the ultimate, like, this is who I am, and sometimes this. And I think often just replacing that but with an and can really open things up for people and give them permission to see a variation, whilst still holding on to, but this is who I really am.
Yeah, I'm a woman and I cycle.
Quite.
Yeah, exactly. That women cycling campaign that I thought looked brilliant. Okay, going to move on to another question that is asking about advertising, engagement. So this is from John Carr. Many years ago, a Bavarian TV advert was strapline: the man who owns a BMW knows when to use it, as the guy walked past his car to the bus. Should we be exploring the use of such advertising to encourage sustainable travel choices? Pete, would you like to?
Can I comment on this? Some of it relates to research I'm doing at the moment, actually, or intend to do in the next few months. It's a great one, that, and it's a great example, and time-honoured advertising there. I think one of the things we should do is, yes, advertising, and if you want to a more recent example, Biker's Best had a nice sort of right sizing, right tool for the job, kind of quite refreshed campaign for that. As well as advertising, and worked in that field for a while, what we really need is not just a top-down advertising to message to people, but actually just a way of people being able to signal and show their travel choices. So being able to actually show and celebrate the fact that they might be using the car less, that they might have gone from 3 cars to 2 cars, that they might be someone who drives, but now they're taking the bus. So some way in which people might be empowered or enabled to signal some of their own travel behaviour, and that way we've got the sort of lubrication that might enable to this to happen, rather than travel always being an individual, private sort of choice, in which case we never really get much visibility on what other people are doing.
Yeah, of course. And I feel like as well, the sort of the Bavarian TV advert that George's referring to there sounds like quite a bit of fun, and like quite, I guess, Rob, Livvy, I guess more of the transport background. Do you think we could inject a bit more fun and playfulness in I guess, some of the things we talk about with, and when we're kind of doing these campaigns around behaviour change in travel?
I think Rob's going, he's nodding.
Yeah, no, sure. I was waiting to see if you wanted to go in there, but absolutely. I mean, the Will Women thing was all about that. So trying to strip away the perception of what it means to be a cyclist, that you have to go and wear lycra, that you have to get up at 5 and go out on a kind of £2,000 bike, and just kind of strip all that away and actually get some emotion into it. Remember how good it felt to get on your bike when you were a kid and the streamers are kind of going behind you and you're cycling down the street, and kind of try to bring some of that back. I think there's a huge role for that, particularly when it comes to things like cycling or active travel. It's perhaps a bit more difficult to get emotion in when it comes to using the bus, but there's good ways you can do it.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, next question, quite a fundamental one. This is from Jolie Gordon. How do you help someone who doesn't know how to form a habit if changing feels impossible to them? Livvy, conscious you haven't spoken yet, would you like to chime in on that one? What would you say to someone asking that question?
So specifically around travel behaviours, there's the thing is to get people to give something a trial. So the thing about behaviour is you need to repeat it and you need to do it regularly. But quite often the barrier to starting something is the perception of how awful it is. So giving something a trial and having a set period of time can really help. So there's been lots of research done on commuter travel where people sign up to do a travel. They sign up to a trial for a fixed period of time. They also, one of the biggest things is also talking about what are the challenges they need to overcome and writing these down and being clear about that. So let's say cycling again. So what are the barriers to cycling? Well, if it's raining, I'm probably going to be less likely to cycle. How are you going to overcome that? Okay, I'm going to make sure I've got waterproof clothing next to my bike for that moment that it happens. So basically, if someone thinks things through, and it's called an implementation intervention, something or other, someone else can, it's I, really snappy. If people think those things through, then when they come to approach it, they're already ready to do it. But it's about repetition as well. So habits only become entrenched if you repeat them. So that's part of the thing. And if you say, I'm going to do something for a fixed period of time, then afterwards, quite a lot often with travel-based behaviours, people will adopt them and do things that they didn't expect they would do.
Yeah, and I think, that question, I think, there is a perception, particularly with organisations we work with, where we're trying to change travel behaviour, that people are resistant, and it feels impossible. So a question from Anthea: is the onus on the individual to change their behaviours, or on the organisation and society to change their requirements and expectations? Pete?
Yeah, if I could, I mean, I wanted my talk to play into that a little bit about, and I think the good subject matter would be this I frame, S frame. Is it the individual that is going to lead behaviour change, or the system, the S one? Read on if you want to know more there. But it also relates obviously to climate points of saying is, who's responsible for, say, any climate emissions? Is it the individual's carbon emissions, or are we all together as a population? People will debate that back and forth. What I would say is, listen carefully to the discourse and who it's coming from. So there is a sleight of hand that can be done where large stakeholders can push things onto individuals as though they're saying this is an individual choice problem, and we sometimes fall into that trap of nodding and saying yes, actually it is the individual's responsibility, when actually there are system-wide changes that really need to happen to facilitate this. You'll have examples from public health especially of people doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Can I just come in on that one,
Yeah,
Charlotte? Is that right? Because I think I enjoyed you showing the ISM model, Pete, when you were talking, because I think that clearly demonstrates that it's not one or the other, and actually all three things in that person's question. It's about the individual, it's about the social context, and then the material context. All of those things influence behaviour, and there's all sorts of factors within each of those that actually, that influence whether a particular behaviour happens or not. So, cycling is a great example. You can change the infrastructure. You can put in incredible bike lanes and so on, and they can just remain empty because there's other things going on. There's more fundamental barriers to why people aren't cycling or not. So I think it's a really tricky question, that, and it's absolutely about the system, but the system includes individuals and the way in which they, all the kind of behavioural quirks in which they exist.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And that actually brings us on really nicely to the next question. And this is something that, again, sort of when we're having conversations with organisations about communications versus actually infrastructure, but I'll ask the question. So this is from Neve. So to what extent is infrastructure a more important factor than behaviour change to increase the uptake of sustainable transport / reduce car usage? Should we perhaps follow Paris's example of build and they will come?
Okay. I was just going to jump in and say, for me, exactly what Pete was saying and Rob's saying. Well, the ISM model demonstrates that behaviour change infrastructure is integral to behaviour change. So it's not just about thinking about the individual; it's that all those three those aspects to it. So also within that, what are the social influences? As we've heard about those. So does the infrastructure normalise the behaviour because it's much easier to do it? So I think in London, when there started to be a lot more bike lanes, then you saw more people cycling, and therefore it looks like more people are doing it, so that helps to normalise it. So normally they're kind of integrated, but it's also really important to understand what's the barrier to the behaviour. So if the barrier is it's not socially acceptable, building lots of infrastructure won't solve the problem. If the barrier is that when you get to work, you're hot and sweaty and you're in a really high powered environment and you've got an important meeting and there's nowhere to shower, it's not, it's not going to work. So you've got to understand what the barrier is first of all before you come up with the solutions. And I think that's the really important bit, is understand who your target audience is and why they're not doing the right, what's the barriers for them. Is it a psychological factor like Shahroo's been talking about? So that's really key.
And just to build on that, as it's that really specific on active travel, a really good evidence review last year that's done the rounds called Interventions to Increase Active Travel, a systematic review. Eleanor Rowe, Harriet Larrington Spencer from Westminster, University of Westminster. Yeah, that sort of says precondition. If you look at what's happened in the past, you've got to have the infrastructure as a fundamental, and then you boost it with behaviour change measures. Now, what happens in the future, that's what we're fundamentally interested in influencing, obviously, might be a bit different. And the levers we might change might be bolder or might be different. I totally agree with Livvy there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a balance of both, which I think is. So next question from James. How can you encourage people to make small step change towards sustainable commuting? Shahroo, I'm going to come to you if that's okay, because you talked a lot about small changes not being kind of obstructed by the big picture, which can kind of hold people back. So what would you say to James on this?
I think the small changes thing is much harder for people a lot of the time. The idea of doing something moderately, the idea of doing something that's not particularly transformative or exciting is actually boring. And so I think this idea of stacking habits and small changes kind of turns people off sometimes, because they think, am I not, is this something I want to actually, is it interesting enough the way that I'm doing it? Is it something that I'm proud of? Or is it just a little tweak I made that could kind of be a drop in the sea? And so what I think can be enormously helpful is to work backwards from where you want to be and identify the big change that those small changes create. I think a lot of the time when people are doing it from day one, they think it's a sort of like ploddy, this will get easier, then I'll have a go here and I'll have a go there. And what that does is it formalizes an end point and says, look, the compound impact of this, even if there's a brief deviation, provided you come back, is going to be this. And so they feel that there's a direction that they're moving in regardless, with those small choices, as opposed to that sort of easy peasy, you can do a little bit here and there, which doesn't tend to be very compelling, I find.
Okay, thank you, Shahroo. We've probably got time for one more question, maybe two, depending how quickly we can answer this one. So this is from Hannah, a very specific question around car parking and lift sharing. We have a big issue, or not with lift sharing, I put that on there myself, coming from my background here. We have a big issue with the lack of car parking spaces. How can we change the narrative frustration from colleagues to an opportunity to change how we commute and get buy-in with this? Rob, you had your hand up there.
I thought that was an accidental hand up.
Oh, was it? Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's a really good one. I mean, I think I would probably go back to the three principles that I spoke about. So can you make it easier for people to do something else other than park? Can you add pressure in some interesting ways away from car and to other forms of transport? So can you tap into social norms or developing social norms? Can you get people to make commitments, and so on? And kind of what's the right moment, what's the right time, what's the right place to actually make an intervention into that. So yeah, I don't have the answer, but I've got some kind of principles that could help you get to the answer.
Thanks, Rob. Livvy, any thoughts on that? I guess you've got quite a lot of experience with that kind of scenario as well.
Interestingly, in North Bristol, they found that the loss of car parks was the biggest changer to people's travel behaviours, and actually people started cycling and started lift sharing. So probably the thing would be to present lift sharing as a solution to people's problem. But you've got to understand it's all those things that you offer, like the mapping of where people are. So make it really easy for people to find people to lift share with, join people up, connect people up, conduct social events so people get to know each other, they feel uncomfortable about doing those things, but also understand why is it still the preference to drive if it's difficult to park. So again, you've got to understand that to then develop some solutions.
Thank you, Livvy. Okay, the question at the top there, I'm not sure how that applies to anything else. And team in the back, let me know if we've got time for one more question. The next one down, which has been upvoted the most, actually is from Claire. So again, quite a transport specific one. Are there any successful examples of encouraging people in remote rural locations to move away from car use where public transport isn't always reliable? Yes, Pete, I thought this might be one for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the country that's doing it best looks like France, but that's my primary source for thinking that is Bayat Kubitz, Kubitz, who's a consultant that often appears on great transport conferences such as this one, but not today. She gives really good examples of rural transport in France. France is a much bigger country, very, very rural areas, and really good examples of lift sharing they do, of demand responsive transport, of even credits for taxis, which are a good way of reducing the need for car ownership in those areas. So yeah, point in that sort of direction. I think France is doing it pretty well.
Okay, Behaviour. Yeah, they seem to be doing a lot of things well in transport on the continent, where we could learn some lessons in the UK. So that wraps up the panel. Thank you all so much for your brilliant talks, taking the time to be with us today and answering our viewers' questions. And that is the end of the ZC3 conference. Thank you so much for contributing.